The wind howled across the open prairie that night, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and sage. Out on the edge of nowhere, where the fields seemed to stretch until they touched the stars, a small wooden ranch house sat alone, its shutters rattling against the gusts. The man inside had lived with silence for so long that he had almost forgotten what another voice sounded like. Years of tending cattle, mending fences, and watching the horizon had carved his life down to routine. He ate alone, worked alone, and slept with only the sound of coyotes in the distance. Folks in town called him the Lonely Rancher, though most had long stopped calling at all. He had buried too many people and too many hopes to expect company anymore. That evening he had been sitting by the fire, hat tipped low, when the dogs outside started barking. At first he thought it was just a passing coyote or the creak of the barn door swinging on its rusty hinge. But the sound was sharper, closer, and his dogs didn't bark at nothing. He stood, pulled on his boots, and stepped out into the night. The moon hung pale and swollen, lighting up the dry ground enough that he could see the dust cloud moving across the dirt road. A wagon, no, not a wagon. Something smaller, dragged or pushed, scraping along like it didn't belong. He walked toward the noise with his lantern held high, the dogs pacing at his heels. That's when he saw it, an old burlap sack, tied shut with rope, lying in the middle of the yard as though dropped by unseen hands. It shifted. Not much, but enough to send a cold weight pressing into his chest. His first thought was that some cruel soul had dumped an animal, a stray calf or a litter of pups, bound and left to die. He cursed under his breath, ready to cut the rope and let the poor creature free. Then came the sound. A muffled cry, raw and desperate, broke through the sack. "Please open it. I can't breathe." He froze, lantern trembling in his grip. The voice was not the whimper of an animal, but the sharp, broken plea of a woman. For a moment his mind couldn't catch up to what his ears had heard. No one came out this far. No one left things like this on his land. He knelt beside the sack, his fingers brushing the rough fabric. It shifted again, more violently this time, and he could hear the gasps from within. The rancher swallowed hard. He wanted to untie the rope right then, to give air to whoever was trapped, but something deeper stopped him. Questions piled up in his mind, questions that didn't have answers. Who would leave a woman bound and suffocating at his doorstep? Why here, miles from the nearest town? And what would he be opening himself to if he dared untie it? His dogs circled, whining, as though sensing the weight of the moment. The prairie seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind went still, leaving only the rasping, panicked voice from inside the sack. "Please," she begged again, weaker this time. He tugged at the knot, his calloused hands struggling with the coarse rope. When it finally gave, he pulled. The sack opened just enough for moonlight to slip inside. What he saw made him jerk back, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't just the sight of her face, though pale, streaked with dirt, and half hidden beneath tangled hair. It was the way her eyes locked onto his, wide with something between terror and relief. She wasn't merely trapped. She had been delivered to him. The rancher's heart thundered as he stumbled back a step. He had lived long enough to know trouble when it came knocking, and this was no ordinary trouble. The sack, the rope, the desperate plea, it all carried the weight of something bigger, something that had reached his quiet corner of the prairie by deliberate hands. And now that she was here, there was no undoing it. She coughed, trying to speak, but her voice broke into a raw whisper. "Don't let them find me." The words clung to him like burrs, sharp and unshakable. Whoever they were, she feared them more than suffocation, more than the dark, more than being abandoned in the middle of nowhere. He wanted to demand answers, to know who she was and why she had been left on his land, but the night seemed to close in tighter around him. He could feel eyes, unseen but certain, watching from beyond the edges of the lantern's glow. The prairie, once so empty, now felt crowded with shadows. The rancher knelt again, gripping the sack with shaking hands, torn between helping her and protecting himself. His life had been built on silence, on keeping to himself and asking no questions, but here was a question he could not walk away from. The woman inside stared at him with a pleading intensity that cut through the years of solitude. And when he lifted the sack fully away, when the cool night air rushed in and her ragged breath steadied, he saw something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't just her face or her torn dress or the rope burns along her wrists. It was what lay beneath her, something wrapped in a second layer of burlap, heavier, still, and tied tighter than before. The rancher's hand trembled as he reached for it, lantern light flickering across the coarse fibers. He had thought the sack contained only her, but now he knew better. Something else had been hidden with her, something meant to stay bound. He froze, the sound of her desperate breathing. Behind him, the weight of the unknown before him. The prairie, silent and endless, seemed to press in from all directions as if waiting for him to make his choice. Would he untie it? His lantern guttered in the wind, shadows stretching long across the dirt. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote howled, and the dog stiffened at his side. The rancher's throat went dry as his fingers brushed the second knot, tighter than the first. What he found when he opened it would change everything. But for now, he could only stare, torn between fear and duty, as the night held its secret. Just out of reach, the rancher's hand lingered above the second knot, his knuckles white around the fraying rope. He could hear the woman behind him still struggling to catch her breath, every exhale jagged as if her lungs were learning air. All over again. The lantern's flame bent and snapped in the breeze, stretching shadows across the hard ground. His dogs whined, restless, as though they too sensed that whatever was bound inside that sack was not meant to see the light. He pulled his hand back slowly, chest heaving, and turned to the woman. She had pushed herself upright, her frame trembling with the effort. Dirt clung to her skin, streaked with sweat and fear, but her eyes stayed sharp, alive with a kind of desperation he had not seen in years. She hugged her knees close, watching him like she was waiting to see if he would be her savior or her downfall. "You don't know what's in there," she rasped, voice frayed but steady enough to carry weight. The rancher narrowed his eyes. "And you do?" She looked toward the fields, as if expecting something or someone to appear. Then she shook her head, strands of hair falling loose across her face. "I shouldn't be here. They'll come back." Her words burrowed under his skin, raising more questions than answers. Who were they? Why had she been left here of all places, miles from the nearest soul? And what kind of burden had been tied up alongside her? The rancher straightened, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. "You need water," he muttered. He guided her toward the house, though part of him never took his eyes off the sack lying heavy in the yard. The woman stumbled with each step, but she followed, glancing back every few paces as though the darkness itself might reach out and snatch her away. Inside, the fire glowed low, throwing amber light across the wooden walls. He poured her a tin cup of water, watching as she gulped it down with shaking hands. When she finished, he set the cup aside and crouched near the fire. "You gonna tell me your name?" he asked. She hesitated, eyes flickering toward the window, where the night pressed in. Finally she whispered, "Clara." The rancher let the name settle in the room. It didn't tell him much, but it was something human, something he could hold on to. He leaned back on his heels, studying her. She looked too clean, too well kept to be a wanderer or outlaw, but the marks on her wrists told a story she hadn't spoken yet. "Clara," he repeated, slow and steady. "You best start talking. Folks don't end up tied in sacks out here without reason." Her lips parted, but no words came. She shook her head, pulling the blanket he had draped over her shoulders tighter. If I tell you, you'll wish you never touched that rope. You'll wish you never saw me. He wanted to laugh at that, to dismiss it as wild fear, but something in her tone made the sound die in his throat. He had lived long enough to know when someone spoke plain truth, even when it came wrapped in madness. The silence stretched. Outside, the dogs barked once, sharp and sudden, then fell quiet. Clara stiffened, her knuckles turning white against the fabric of the blanket. They're looking, she whispered. They always do. The rancher stood, moving to the window. The prairie spread out before him in silver light, calm and endless. Nothing stirred, but his gut told him she wasn't just spooking herself. He turned back to her. You ran from someone. She didn't answer. They left you on my land. Still nothing. And whatever's in that second sack, it belongs to them too, don't it? Clara's breath caught. She looked away, but her silence spoke louder than any words. The rancher scrubbed a hand over his face. He had no business being tangled up in another's war. He'd built his life on distance, on staying out of town. Business, on keeping his land and his heart quiet. But the woman sitting by his fire was flesh and blood, not a problem he could walk past like a broken fence post. And that second sack, waiting in the yard, pulled at him like a weight on his chest. He poured himself a drink from the bottle he kept on the shelf, letting the burn settle his nerves. Clara watched him with eyes that never seemed to stop searching. The shadows. You think they'll come here tonight? He asked. Her voice was faint, but the certainty in it struck deep. They already know. The hours dragged as the fire sank low. The rancher sat in his chair, rifle resting across his lap, while Clara dozed fitfully on the couch, jerking awake at every creak and gust of wind. He didn't sleep. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark window, ears tuned for the crunch of footsteps. On gravel. But the night gave nothing. No visitors, no wagon wheels, no knock at the door. Only the prairie, silent and heavy at dawn. When the first streaks of light brushed the sky, he stepped outside. The sack was still there in the yard, dew clinging to its coarse fabric. He approached it slow, each step measured. The dogs sniffed at it, tails stiff, then backed away with low growls. Whatever lay inside, even they wanted no part of it. Rancher crouched and pressed his hand against the burlap, solid, heavy, not shifting the way Clara had. He tried to guess its shape, but the material gave nothing. His fingers brushed the knot, and he swore he felt a faint warmth bleeding through the fabric. Though that could have been his mind playing tricks after a sleepless night out behind him, Clara's voice cracked the morning stillness. Don't open it, not yet. He turned, squinting against the light. She stood on the porch, blanket still clutched around her shoulders, hair wild from the night. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with something close to fear. You know. What's in it? He pressed out. Her lips trembled. I know enough. He stood, brushing the dirt from his hands. Then you better start explaining. Clara's gaze dropped to the ground. She seemed to wrestle with herself, the silence stretching thin between them. Finally she lifted her eyes. It's not just me they're after, she said. It's what they hid with me. And if you untie that rope, you'll see why they'll never stop coming. The rancher felt the weight of her words settle over the land. He looked at the sack again, at the rope wound tight like it was holding back more than just an object. His pulse quickened. The prairie stretched wide around them, quiet and endless. But it no longer felt empty. It felt like the calm before a storm that had already chosen his land as the place to break. He glanced back at Clara, her face pale in the morning light, and then at the sack lying silent in the yard. He didn't know which one carried the greater danger, but he knew one thing with certainty. His life of solitude had ended the moment he untied that first knot, and now, With the sun climbing higher and shadows shrinking, the question of what lay inside the second sack burned hotter than ever, daring him to pull the rope and face whatever truth waited within. But for the moment, he held back, standing still while the prairie wind picked up again, carrying with it the distant sound of hooves on the horizon. The sound of hooves came thin and steady at first, like a drumbeat carried on the wind. By the time the sun climbed a hand higher, the noise had settled under the rancher's skin, a warning that would not fade. He led Clara inside and checked the rifle, then checked it again, a habit born from years of living at the edge of trouble. She stood near the hearth with the blanket tight around her shoulders, her eyes on the door. He could tell she was listening for the same thing he heard, the truth of what was coming. He went to the barn and saddled his old bay. If riders crested the far ridge, he wanted a look before they reached his fence line. Before he mounted, he paused by the second sack. The rope was still tight, the burlap beaded with dew. He felt heat under his palm, a living warmth that rose and faded in a slow rhythm. The sensation made his breath hitch. He looked toward the porch. Clara watched him, her face set in a hard line. "Not yet," she said, barely above a whisper. He nodded once and swung into the saddle. The dogs followed as he rode to the high spot behind the corral where the prairie unrolled all the way to the blue rim of the hills. He kept low, had brim shading his eyes. Dust rose far off, a soft smear, above the road that ran down from town. 3 riders, maybe 4. The bay shifted under him, ears flicking. He slid from the saddle and settled behind a clump of sage while the dogs lay flat in the grass. When the riders came into clearer view, he eased out a breath. 2 looked like ranch hands or drifters. The third wore a town coat and a hat that had seen more parlors than pastures. The fourth man rode slightly behind the others, too straight in the saddle, and his horse carried itself like a piece of fine stock. He waited until they were close enough to smell horse sweat. Then he stepped out, rifle down but ready. The men pulled up short, hooves skittering, dust lifting around them. The man in the town coat smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. "Mornin'," the man said. "Fine day for a ride." "State your business," the rancher answered. The man tipped his hat. "Name's Pike. I look after matters for the railroad and certain folks who prefer their names kept tidy. We're searching for a missing item, delivered by mistake toward this direction." The rancher said nothing. Pike's smile held, but the edges had a bite. "My partners here are Mr. Dunn and Mr. Cale. The gentleman behind me is Ward, an investigator of sorts. We are told a wagon broke an axle near the creek last night and something slid off into the dark. You know how the prairie eats things. We're keen to find it before the coyotes do." The rancher felt the air thin in his lungs. He did not look toward the house and he did not turn his head toward the yard. Pike followed his silence like a man trained to track small movements. Ward, the straight-backed rider, scanned the property with slow, careful attention. "Seen anything?" Pike asked. "Coyotes," the rancher said. "Wind," Pike chuckled. "Wind is the only honest thing in these parts." He looked past the rancher toward the barn and corral. "We might water our stock and have a glance around. Railroad business carries weight now. You know how it goes, titles and claims, fines and papers." "This is my land," the rancher said. He could feel the old anger rising, the kind that had not visited in years. "You can water at the creek by the road. You do not set a boot past my fence." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ward nudged his horse forward half a step, his eyes sliding to the high spot where the rancher had been lying in the grass. The investigator lifted his chin, scenting the morning like a wolf that had caught the trace of something warm. "We're not here to trouble you," Pike said at last, voice smooth again. "We're here to collect what belongs to our employers. If it wanders onto your soil, that's rough luck. We'll keep the peace and be gone." "It did not," the rancher said. Pike's gaze sharpened. He tipped his hat again, then turned his horse. "Water the stock," he told his men. "Keep your eyes open." They rode off toward the road. The rancher stood still until they were no more than specks, then he went back to the house. Clara was waiting at the door, her face drained. "That one in the coat," she said. "He smiles with his mouth and not his heart." "Pike," the rancher answered, hanging his hat on the peg. "Railroad man." She shivered. "He is not the worst of them." He added another log to the fire and felt the day cool even with the sun higher. "You will tell me how you came to be in that sack," he said, "and you will tell me who put you there." Clara moved closer to the hearth, holding her hands to the heat like a child. When she spoke, her voice carried that same raw honesty that had wrestled him awake in the night. "My father worked as a bookkeeper for a warehouse by the tracks east of town," she said. "It looked like freight for grain and tools. But he found figures that did not add up, cars that came and went under the wrong marks, goods that never passed the ledger. He asked the wrong questions to the wrong men." She swallowed, eyes on the flames. He kept a copy of what he found. A small ledger, thin and bound in hide. He said that if anything happened to him, it would protect us. The rancher pictured the second sack, heavy and warm, heat pulsing under the burlap. A ledger did not carry warmth. He stayed quiet. He never came home one night, Clara said. "I searched his desk and found a note telling me to take the ledger to the sheriff by first light. Before dawn, men came to the house. I went out the back and ran to the creek. Someone grabbed me near the bend. The world went dark. When I woke, my hands were raw and the air was thin. I heard wheels and voices. I felt them lift me. They said my name like it was a coin they wanted to spend." She looked up. The rancher saw fear, but he also saw iron. "They think I have it," she said. "They think I know where it is." He felt the old boards under his boots as if the room had shifted. He had known sheriffs who kept the law and some who kept themselves. He had known railroad men who brought freight and some who moved other things under the cover of freight. None of it explained the heat inside that second sack. "There is more," he said. "There is a man in town," the rancher said. "A preacher who runs a small chapel near the telegraph office. He keeps a lockbox for the widows when the mines flood and for ranch hands who cannot trust a saloon. He has a quiet strength. If there is a ledger, and if it should not be here, he might hold it safe." Clara's eyes lit for a second, then fell. They watched the roads. Pike did not ride here by chance. Someone sent him with a map. "Maps are cheap," the rancher sighed. "Good eyes or not." She nodded, then flinched as a board popped in the fire. The rancher crossed the room and lifted the rifle from the wall. "I will ride into town at dusk," he said. "I will speak to the preacher and see the sheriff's eyes. In daylight a man can pretend to be something he is not. At night a man's truth visits him." Clara set the cup down. "You cannot leave me here alone." He looked at her, then at the second sack through the open door. He could leave her with the dogs and a pistol, yet something in him balked. The last time he had left a living soul at his ranch without him, he had returned to a grave he dug with his own hands. He felt that weight settle on his shoulders again. "You." "All right," he said. "We ride together, but we do it clean." He went to the barn and harnessed a small wagon. He lifted the second sack and laid it on the bed, covering it with a tarp and a layer of feed sacks. The warmth under his hands felt like a heartbeat, slow and steady. He did not like the sense it gave him that he was placing something alive behind him, something that did not belong to him yet would not let him go. By late afternoon, they headed toward town. The sky wore a lid of thin cloud, and the prairie light turned flat and careful. The dogs loped behind the wagon for half a mile, then peeled off toward the creek. Clara sat beside him, hat brim low, hands taut on the edge of the bench. They spoke little. The road bent past the cottonwoods where the creek ran muddy this time of year. The rancher kept the team at an easy pace and watched the brush. Twice, he saw movement where no wind touched, but nothing stepped onto the track. When they reached the slope above town, he halted the team. The buildings lay in a neat row, false fronts painted bright for folks who needed proof of civilization. The saloon doors swung in a slow rhythm and a stagecoach rattled past the general store. Near the telegraph office, a boy sat on a crate reading a handbill. The church stood at the far end, small and plain, whitewashed boards shining against. The darker street. Down there, the rancher said, pointing with his chin. We go to the preacher first, then I will speak to the sheriff. Clara touched his arm. You do not know who the sheriff serves. I will know soon enough, he said. They rattled down the hill. Two men leaned against the post outside the saloon and looked up as the wagon passed. The rancher felt their eyes settle on the tarp in the back. He drove past without a glance and pulled up at the church. He helped Clara down, then lifted the tarp just enough to check the second sack. The heat still pulsed. He lowered the cloth with care. Inside, the chapel smelled of pine and lamp oil. The preacher, a lean man with a kind face, turned from the small altar and nodded. Double quotes, evening, he said. Evening, the rancher answered. We need a word in private. The preacher studied Clara, saw more than dust and travel in her expression, and led them to a side room. The rancher spoke plain and brief, and while he spoke, he watched the preacher's eyes. The man's gaze stayed steady, the kind that could hold grief without breaking and hold joy without boasting. I can keep what must be kept, the preacher said, but I must know what kind of storm I am inviting through my door. Railroad. Men, the rancher said. A ledger, maybe. Something else for certain. Something else, the preacher repeated, a question inside the words. The rancher hesitated, then shook his head. I will not open it in God's house. The preacher held his look a moment, then nodded. You are wise. They agreed on a signal if trouble came and a place behind the chapel where a wagon could slip into shadow. As they stepped back into the main aisle, the door creaked. Ward, the investigator, stood there with his hat in his hand, his eyes scanning the pews. Pike followed him, smile soft as fresh bread. Evening, Reverend, Pike said. I do love the smell of a church. It makes a man feel like he's forgiven before he asks. The preacher's voice stayed mild. Evening, gentlemen. Service is on Sunday. Today is for quiet. Pike turned to the rancher and Clara with a warmth that felt like a brand held close to the skin. Now here we are again, he said. The prairie is smaller than it looks. Ward's gaze shifted to the door that led to the side room, then to the window where the wagon waited outside. The rancher felt his fingers tighten at his sides. He did not care for town rooms when a wolf was weighing the exits. We're looking for a ledger, Pike said lightly. Small, bound in hide, filled with numbers that do not belong to the light. We are also looking for an item of special interest to our employers. A medical item, rare and sensitive, marked for transport but mislaid on a rough night. It is important that it be returned without delay. The rancher kept his voice even. I have not seen your ledger. Ah, Pike said. And the other item? Mislaid things know their own way home, the rancher said. Ward finally spoke, voice dry as tinder. Your wagon runs heavy for a short visit. The rancher met his eyes, and what he saw there made his stomach knot. Ward carried a calm that did not waver. The eyes of a man who could stand in the open and never blink. We will not search a church, Pike said, hands raised in a show of virtue. We are men of respect. We will wait outside and trust that the Reverend will counsel you toward good choices. Think on it. Bring us what is owed. We will be at the hotel before the night chill hits." They left as smoothly as they had come. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like the snapping of a trap, invisible and sure. The preacher released a breath he had been holding. "You cannot stay here long," he said. "They will watch every shadow." Clara's face had lost color. "They know about the ledger," she said. "They know about the other thing. They will not stop." The rancher nodded. "Then we move while they settle." They rolled the wagon out the back and followed a narrow lane behind the livery. The preacher walked with them, then stopped at a corner where the alley met the creek. He lifted a trap in the earth, a hatch he used when floodwater rose. Beneath lay a culvert that ran under the road and out toward the river berm. "When the time comes," the preacher said, "things can vanish when they must." The rancher looked into the dark space and felt a chill. Hiding was one thing, vanishing was another. He thanked the preacher, then guided the team into the alley. They skirted the back of the town and made for the north road, the one that led toward the old mission ruins and the broad flats beyond. Pike would expect the main route. A man like Ward would watch both, yet even a careful hunter had to blink by. The time night lowered itself over the prairie. They were on the open stretch. The stars came out in a clean scatter. The wagon creaked. The horses blew softly. Clara kept her eyes on the second sack, as if the heat under the tarp called to her with a pull she could not resist. The rancher felt it too, a pulse that rose. Through the boards, up the bench, into his bones. He had a sudden sense that whatever they carried was not meant for wagons, not meant for men to ferry like grain or tools. It felt like a wrong note held too long. Ahead, a lantern winked once, then disappeared. He reined up, heart kicking. The road bent toward a shallow ford, and in the bend stood a figure with a light cupped in his hand. The rancher could not see a face. He could only see the shape of a hat and the gleam of water behind. Clara touched his sleeve. "Do you know him?" "No," the rancher said. "But he knows us." He reached back and let his hand rest on the tarp. The warmth rose to meet his palm in a slow, living beat. He held it there for a single breath, then drew his hand away and set the rifle across his knees. The night around them waited without a sound, the kind of waiting that knows a choice is about to be made. The rancher held the reins tight as the wagon groaned to a stop, the horses tossing their heads and blowing steam into the chill night. The figure ahead did not move. The lantern he carried hung low, swaying just enough to send its light over the surface of the ford. Behind him, the water ran black and slow, whispering against the rocks. Clara sat rigid at the rancher's side, her hands gripping the bench. As though letting go might pull her into the dark, the rancher lifted the rifle from across his knees and rested it against his shoulder. He did not raise it yet, but the weight of it steadied his breath. "Evenin'," he called out, voice sharp in the open air. The figure tipped the lantern higher, revealing the edge of his face. Weathered skin, eyes too calm for the hour. He looked like a man who had seen more than his share of dust and blood, the kind of man who did not step into the road unless he had reason. "You've taken something that doesn't belong to you," the man said. His voice carried across the water, steady as stone. "Best set it down here and turn back before the night closes on you." Clara sucked in a breath. The rancher glanced at her and saw that same fear sparking in her eyes, the same fear that had been with her since he first dragged her from the sack. She shook her head once, fast and desperate. The rancher shifted the rifle higher. "You tell Pike to ride his own roads," he said. "This track is mine tonight." The man gave a faint smile, nothing warm in it. "Pike rides for others. I ride for what lies in your wagon. There's no turning away from it, not for you, not for her." His eyes flicked to Clara, and she shrank back like he had touched her without moving a hand. The rancher felt the warmth pulsing under the tarp behind him, felt it creep into the night air as if the sack itself was breathing. The horses grew restless, stamping and tossing. He did not know if it was the smell of the man on the road or the weight of what they carried that unsettled them. The figure stepped aside and let the lantern drop to the ground. It kept burning, casting a circle of gold on the dirt, but the man's body faded into the shadows at the edge of the ford. The rancher pulled the reins hard and urged the horses forward. The wagon rattled into the shallow water, wheels grinding against stone. He kept his eyes moving, watching the banks on either side. He could feel the trap closing, though he had not yet seen the jaws. Clara leaned closer, whispering through clenched teeth, "They'll surround us here. They always choose the crossings. You should have turned back." The rancher said nothing. His jaw tightened as the wagon bumped out of the ford and onto the far bank. That was when the first shot cracked through the night. The round snapped past his ear and struck a tree behind them. The horses screamed and reared. He hauled the reins down and shouted, the rifle clattering in his lap as the wagon lurched. Shadows rose on both sides of the road. Men with rifles stepped into the lantern glow, their eyes catching the light. Pike was not among them, but the investigator Ward was, his calm face watching like a hawk measuring distance to prey. Clara cried out and ducked low. The rancher swung the rifle up and fired once, the shot kicking sparks from a rock near Ward's boot. The men scattered into cover, but not before a second round split the night and tore through the wagon's tarp. A hiss of steam rose from the sack beneath, and the rancher felt the heat flare hotter against his back. "Give it up," Ward called, his voice carrying over the crack of gun metal. "You don't know what you're dragging across this land. Hand it over and walk away alive." The rancher's pulse hammered in his ears. He fired again, forcing one of the shadows back into the brush, then grabbed the reins and drove the horses hard. The wagon jolted and bounced, the feed sack shifting, the second sack rolling against the boards with a sound that was not natural. Not cloth against wood, but something deeper, heavier, alive. Clara clutched the bench, her face turned toward the ground. "They'll hunt us till the end of the world," she said. "They won't stop." The rancher didn't answer. He kept the team running until the road bent away from the ford and the shooting faded behind them. Still, the sense of being hunted did not lift. It pressed down heavier, like eyes on his back. He pulled the wagon off the road and into a stand of mesquite, hidden in the shadows. When the horses had quieted, he turned to Clara. "You'll tell me everything now. No more half stories. What is in that sack?" Clara shook her head, her hair falling wild across her face. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me." She pressed her lips tight, then glanced at the tarp. The heat rising from it was strong enough now that even the night air couldn't cool it. She reached toward it, then snatched her hand back as though it had burned. "My father called it a cure," she said at last, "but others call it a weapon. It came west on a train under false cargo, packed tight and guarded. He learned enough to know it was not meant for people like us. It was meant for men with power, men who think they can shape the land to their liking. Whatever is inside there isn't just ledgers and papers. It's something alive, something they've built or stolen or twisted until it became this." She gestured helplessly at the wagon bed. The rancher felt his stomach turn. He thought of the warmth, the steady rhythm under his hand, the way the dogs had refused to go near it. He looked back at her. "And they tied you to it?" "So I'd—" "No," she whispered. "So I'd carry the fear of it everywhere. So they could use me as proof that no one escapes their reach." The rancher leaned back, his eyes on the dark road beyond the trees. Every sound seemed sharper now, the call of an owl, the snap of a twig, the creak of the wagon boards. He knew. They didn't have long before Pike or Ward or one of the others picked up the trail again. He wanted to bury the sack here. To leave it under the soil and ride away with Clara toward the far hills, to pretend none of this had ever touched his land. But he knew they would never stop. They would dig, burn, and tear apart every fence post until they found it. Clara touched his arm. You should let me go. If they see me with you, they'll bring it down on us both. The rancher shook his head. Too late for that. We're in it now. She bowed her head, silent. He reached for the rifle and checked the rounds left. Not enough. He thought of the preacher's culvert, the narrow escape he had offered, and he thought of Ward's calm voice echoing across the water. Every road ahead carried blood. The horses stirred, ears pricking. The rancher froze. From the distance came the faint clatter of hooves again, steady and sure, drawing closer. Clara's eyes widened. They're coming, she breathed. The rancher pulled the tarp tighter over the sack and climbed down, his boots sinking into the soft earth. He motioned Clara low beside the wagon, then crouched in the brush with the rifle ready. His breath came slow, measured, but his heart hammered like a drum. The sound grew until it filled the night. Hooves, then wheels, then voices. A wagon rolled into view on the road, lanterns glowing at its corners. Inside it, figures moved, men armed, their outlines sharp against the glow. Pike rode at the front, his grin visible even at a distance, his coat neat as ever. Ward rode beside him, eyes scanning the brush like he already knew where the rancher crouched. The rancher set his cheek against the stock of the rifle and drew a bead on Pike's chest. For a moment, the world narrowed to the pull of the trigger. But he held his fire. Shooting Pike now would not end it. The men around him would flood the trees, and Clara would be dragged screaming into the dark. Instead, he waited, the weight of the rifle heavy, the heat of the sack pressing against the wagon boards, the tension wound so tight it felt like the land itself might split open. The wagon rolled to a halt in the road, the men climbing down, the lanterns swaying. Pike called out into the night. You've run far enough, he said, his voice smooth as oil. Bring it out, friend. We can end this without ruin. Or we can end it with ruin. The choice is yours. The rancher tightened his grip, every nerve in his body screaming that the moment of choice had arrived. Beside him, Clara clutched his sleeve, whispering words he could not hear over the pounding in his chest. The night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first spark to fall and set the prairie ablaze. The rancher stayed low in the brush. Heart pounding in his chest, the rifle braced steady as Pike's voice carried smooth and heavy through the night. The men with him shifted near the lanterns, rifles glinting, boots crunching the dirt. Ward's eyes kept sweeping the tree line, patient and certain, like a man who knew the quarry was already cornered. Clara pressed close at the rancher's side, her fingers tight on his sleeve, her breath trembling as though each inhale might give them away. The warmth from the hidden sack under the tarp spread out like a fever, soaking into the wagon boards, seeping into the ground itself. The rancher thought of all the trouble that sack had brought to his land, and of how much blood it promised to spill if left in the wrong hands. Pike called out again, words polished like a preacher's sermon. You're just a man on a lonely spread, he said. A man who knows what's fair and what's foolish. There's no shame in laying down a burden that ain't yours. Let us take it, and you'll see your morning in peace. The rancher glanced at Clara. She was pale, her eyes burning with fear and anger both. She shook her head. If you give it to them, everything my father tried to stop will happen. They'll use it, spread it, and no one out here will be safe again. The rancher let the words sink in. He remembered long nights on the range, burying cattle taken by sickness, standing beside neighbors who lost children to fever and hunger. He thought of the preacher's steady eyes and of the sheriff's silence in town. He thought of the land itself, wide and raw, stubborn as the people who scratched a life on it. Some burdens, once carried, could not be set down without leaving ruin. He rose from the brush with the rifle raised. Pike's smile widened like he had expected it. Ward didn't flinch, just fixed those calm eyes on the rancher. "I reckon you boys should ride back the way you came," the rancher called. "This road belongs to me tonight, and what's in my wagon won't ever find its way into your hands." Laughter rolled from Pike's men, rough and mocking, but Pike himself didn't laugh. He leaned on the wagon rail, smile sharpening. "You think you can hold off a dozen men with one rifle? You'll be gone before your trigger cools." The rancher didn't lower his weapon. "Maybe, but I can take you with me, Pike, and Ward there too. You figure your men will follow you when you're lying in the dust?" The silence stretched like a rope pulled too tight. The men shifted, waiting for Pike's answer. Pike's smile faltered just a shade, then returned, thinner this time. "You don't know what you're keeping," Pike said softly. "It's not for killing. It's for control. The men who sent me will have it, one way or another. And when they do, they'll write the rules for every acre between these hills. You could be on the winning side if you'd only think straight." The rancher lowered the barrel a fraction, but not his resolve. "I've seen the winning side, Pike. It's just another way of saying everyone else loses." Before Pike could answer, the sack in the wagon gave a deep shudder, the boards creaking under its weight. A faint glow slipped through the torn burlap. Pale and unearthly, Clara gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Pike's men stepped back, fear flaring in their eyes. Even Ward's calm face flickered. "What in God's name is it?" One of them whispered. Pike barked at them to hold steady, but his voice cracked. The rancher felt the heat behind him like a furnace door thrown open. He realized then that whatever lived inside that sack wasn't built to be tamed. It was pulsing with a force that belonged to no man. Clara clutched his arm. "We can't let them take it. We can't even keep it. We have to end it." The rancher knew she was right. He fired a shot into the dirt near Pike's boots, sending the horses into a frenzy. While the men scrambled, he dropped the rifle, cut the ropes holding the tarp, and dragged the sack onto the ground. The glow burned brighter now, the air thick with heat and a hum that made his teeth ache. Pike shouted, Ward lunged forward, and Clara screamed for him to hurry. The rancher heaved the sack toward the ford. It rolled, tearing open wider, light spilling like fire through the seams. With every movement, the hum grew louder, filling the night with a sound that was neither alive nor dead, neither machine nor spirit, but something in between. The men froze, their rifles forgotten. Pike's smile vanished entirely as he stumbled back, horror twisting his face. The rancher shoved the sack into the black water. The river hissed and boiled, steam rising thick. The glow flared, then dimmed, swallowed by the current. For a moment the earth seemed to tremble, and then silence fell, broken only by the rushing water. Ward stood stiff, his face unreadable at last, then turned his horse without a word. Pike shouted after him, but Ward didn't stop. One by one, the other men followed, their courage washed away with the thing they had chased. Pike stayed longest, his teeth bared in rage, but when the last of the glow faded from the river, even he knew it was over. He spat in the dirt, glared at the rancher, then wheeled his horse and vanished into the dark. The rancher stood breathing hard, sweat cooling on his brow. Clara sank to her knees, tears streaking her dusty face, her hands shaking as she clutched the blanket around her shoulders. The night was quiet again, the stars burning steady overhead, as if the land itself had been waiting for that moment to breathe free. The rancher helped Clara back onto the wagon. They rode in silence toward home, the horses plodding slow but steady. At the ridge above the ranch, dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky with pale fire. Clara turned to him, her eyes red but steady now. "My father always said truth will weigh heavy, but it will also set you free," she whispered. Tonight we carried both. You could have given me up. You could have left me in that sack. But you didn't." The rancher kept his eyes on the trail. "No one deserves to be left behind, not on my land." When they reached the yard, the dogs bounded out, tails wagging, as if the night had never happened. Clara stood on the porch and looked across the endless prairie, her face softening in the morning light. The rancher unhitched the horses, stroked their necks, and felt their muscles calm under his hands. For the first time in days, the warmth in the air was only the warmth of the sun. Life would not return to what it had been before. The men who had chased them might come again, or others worse, but the rancher knew something had shifted. He had faced them down, faced what they carried, and proved that even in the loneliest stretch of land, a man could stand against powers greater than himself. Clara stayed on at the ranch at least for a while. She helped in the kitchen, fed the animals, and little by little the fear drained from her eyes. The preacher visited once, said nothing about what had passed, but left a Bible on the table with a page marked about courage and truth. The sheriff never asked questions either, though his silence told the rancher he had known more than he cared to admit. Weeks later, Clara rode into town with the rancher at her side. She carried her father's true ledger, the small book she had hidden beneath the floor of the wagon, the one thing Pike had not found. She handed it to the preacher, and together they locked it away, safe from men who would twist its numbers for power. When they stepped back onto the street, Clara smiled faintly for the first time since that night. The rancher tipped his hat, and they rode back toward the open land, the prairie stretching wide and free under the sky dot in the quiet that followed. The rancher understood something he had not before. Some burdens come uninvited, but how a man carries them, that's what tells the story of his life. The sack had been a curse, but it had also drawn a line he was willing to defend, a line between what was right and what was ruin. And in the end, it was not the sack that mattered, but the choice he made to stand for more than himself. The prairie wind rose, lifting the dust, carrying it toward the hills. The rancher set his face to it, steady as ever, knowing the land would test him again. But for now, there was peace, and for now, that was enough.